Unit 7. Our study of the Great War, or World War I, will be the beginning of Unit 7, World Wars and Modern America, 1900s to 1930s. It's impossible to separate American history from world history. George Washington instructed politicians to avoid foreign entanglements, and they tried and tried. The beginning of the 20th century put an end to that. It was hard to hide on the other side of an ocean. The United States affected and was affected by the rest of the world. As you read, be sure that you know the words in blue as you go through the text. Notice, too, that as the U.S. expanded, and its expanded influence went to other parts of the world, we became more connected, and our relationships more complicated. Chapter 32, The Great War. What they were fighting about. The exact cause of World War I, initially called the Great War, is hard to pinpoint. Peace in Europe was so fragile that anything could have set it off. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark from these things: militaries, imperialism, nationalism, and alliances. Make sure you go back and know what was happening with each one of these. Pay particular attention to the alliances. The Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. The Triple Entente, meaning understanding or agreement, was France, Britain, and Russia. To remember the main reasons for World War I, use this mnemonic. Main: militaries, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Now let's talk about the spark that started it. Millions of Slavic people who lived under the Austro-Hungarian Empire wanted to become part of Serbia. On June 28th of 1914, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo. A month later, on July 28, 1914, Austria declared war on Serbia. Alliances, or agreements. What happened next is that people defended their allies. Germany was an Austro-Hungarian ally. They declared war on Russia. Russia supported Serbia. Germany also declared war on France, a Russian ally. When Germany invaded Belgium, a neutral country between Germany and France, Britain, an ally of France and Belgium, declared war on Germany. By early August of 1914, a full-scale war had developed in Europe. The two sides were, they now have a new name, the Central Powers, which included Austria-Hungary, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, which is right down here, it's basically Turkey, and Bulgaria. Right there. The Allied powers, or allies, which were the Triple Entente, include Serbia, Russia, France, Great Britain, and later Japan and Italy. This is a side that the United States will ultimately join. Take a second or two to take a look at the map of Europe. That's how it was in 1914. The green countries were the ones that belonged to the Allied powers, and the orange ones are the ones that belong to the Central Powers. American neutrality. President Wilson was determined to follow George Washington's advice to steer clear of foreign conflicts, and America planned to continue trading with both the Allies and the Central Powers. Meanwhile, the war is going on in Europe. The First Battle of the Marne. Germany was fighting a war on two fronts, Russia in the east and France and England in the west. Russia in the east, France and England in the west. The Germans tried to advance into France to knock France out of the war quickly so that they could focus on Russia. However, the small Belgian army held them off for nearly 3 weeks, giving France and Britain time to prepare for war. The French and British stopped the Germans at the Marne River near Paris and declared victory in the First Battle of the Marne. That was September 6th through 12th of 1914. Trench warfare. The First Battle of the Marne proved that neither side would have an easy victory. The armies used a new style of fighting, trench warfare. Soldiers stayed in dugout trenches for long stretches of time, with no man's land in between them. Soldiers would sometimes fire at one another, but there were very few gains for either side, causing a stalemate. A stalemate is a situation in which neither side can win. This drawing at the top of the page shows us a little bit more about trench warfare. We have one side over here, then we have the other side. There's that no man's land in the middle. There's barbed wire in between. Then we have a frontline trench, a support trench, and then a reserve trench. Notice the little guys in there? And the artillery behind them. The guns that are too big to carry, things like cannons and rocket launchers. In 1916, Allied and Central Powers tried to end the impasse on the Western Front. In February, the Germans incited the Battle of Verdun. In July, the Allies instigated the Battle of the Somme. The battles caused many casualties. More new ways of fighting, besides trench warfare. Modern weapons caused far more casualties at a faster rate than ever before. The slaughter on the battlefields led to despair and the destruction of an entire generation of men. Notice some of these new ways of fighting. Machine guns and artillery, cannons, rocket launchers, poison gases, submarines, also called U-boats, and armored tanks. The British were actually the first ones to use those in 1916, and the use of airplanes in war. Pilots who shot down enemy planes were called aces. The most famous German ace was Manfred von Richthofen. He was really called the Red Baron by everybody else. And the most famous American ace was Eddie Rickenbacker. The Lusitania. Naval warfare also changed. The Allies blocked off German ports. The Germans retaliated by targeting Allied ships with submarines called Unterseeboots, or U-boats, undersea boats. On May 7th of 1915, a U-boat sank the British ship Lusitania, killing 1,000 people, including over 100 Americans. There were ammunitions and unlawful goods in the cargo, but the Lusitania was a passenger ship, and the civilian deaths seemed inhumane. Still, determined to remain neutral, Wilson convinced Germany to make the Sussex Pledge, which was named after another ship that was torpedoed by U-boats, and promised not to target ships that didn't carry weapons. We're in 1916. The war had cost the lives of millions of Europeans, and Wilson was re-elected president on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." The next year, following the Sussex Pledge, the Germans went back to attacking all Allied ships, using a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. They intended to cut off the British Isles from the supplies, forcing an end to the war before American intervention. And it almost worked. The Zimmermann Note. In early 1917, British intelligence intercepted a telegram from a German official named Arthur Zimmermann. The Zimmermann Note, as it's now called, proposed an alliance between Germany and Mexico against the United States. In exchange, Germany would help Mexico get back Texas and other lost territories. Thankfully, Mexico declined, but the telegram was published by American newspapers, and anti-German sentiment boiled